What I quite often come across on the internet is, for example, top 10 mistakes in English, or 20 most common mistakes in English you should avoid, or don't ever make this mistake. This podcast is different. This podcast will show you can still be communicative regardless of making mistakes. This podcast will not emphasize how bad it is to say something in the wrong way. Of course, I do not encourage you to speak a broken language. And of course, I help my students speak correct English. The questions I am often asked by my students are, can I say it this way? Or do you still understand me if I say so? Or is it a huge mistake if I say so? So if you happen to ask yourself similar questions, or you are not sure whether you can say something this way or the other, stay with me for this couple of minutes. The examples I'm going to show you today may still be considered mistakes by the linguists and language purists, but those expressions have come into a common usage. They have been used so often that they have become a norm. Also, some of them have become acceptable because of the social norms we have gone through as a society. And this shows how friendly and flexible the language is. And it gives you the room to be flexible too. And a tiny disclaimer before we start. Through this podcast, I want to show you making mistakes is not the end of the world. You can still be communicative and have a successful act of communication completed despite the mistakes. I always stress on the fact that speaking with mistakes but communicating is more beneficial than blocking oneself and not speaking at all. But if you get ready for some exams, or you use the language in very formal and official situations, or your workplace requires accuracy and correctness, then I bet you have a very small room for mistakes. But nothing is ever black or white, so you can still listen to my podcast and get out of it whatever you find appealing. The first thing that maybe some purists still find controversial is a double negative. A tricky thing for a lot of foreigners who can freely use a double negative in their mother tongues. But officially, English doesn't like it. And you are taught to say, for example, I didn't do anything, or I did nothing. But at some point, you begin watching movies in English, or you start to understand more and more English lyrics, and you hear, we don't need no education, or ain't no sunshine when she's gone, or I can't get no satisfaction. And those expressions, this double negative, simply intensifies the negative form. It emphasizes that actually the day is gloomy without the woman, and the day brings no happiness in the song Ain't No Sunshine When She's Gone. Pink Floyd rebelled against the system which brought no good, and they didn't want to be a part of it, and they stressed on that. And Rolling Stones, unfortunately, really couldn't be satisfied. And you can still understand the message. I will not recall any dialogue from the movie, but you can come across a double negative quite often with the word ain't, which is a colloquial form of a negative, and you can negate everything you want with this word. Plus, it very often matches with no. So, for example, I can say, I ain't no money, and that's fine. So you see, a spoken language, everyday common usage of English allows speakers to use a double negative, and everyone gets the message. And again, don't go for it in official and more formal situations. What if I say I have less money than you? Sounds okay, right? And what if I say I have less friends than you? Still understandable. However, I should have said I have fewer friends than you, not less. Little and less is reserved for uncountable nouns when you describe the amount of it. Few and fewer for countable nouns. But still, you can get me. It's not in accordance with grammar rules, but in spoken and everyday usage, this mistake appears and the sentence still conveys the same message. It's a similar case to quantifiers such as an amount of and a number of. Grammatically, we should go for an amount of just with uncountable nouns and a number of just with countable ones. So let's say we had a great amount of food at the party, or we found a great amount of cash in the basement. Grammatically, it is incorrect to match amount of with countable nouns. So saying you're dealing with a great amount of people is considered incorrect. But again, in spoken and informal English, it is acceptable. if you want to be hypercorrect and you don't want to make a language purist cry, say you are dealing with a great number of people instead. The next one, a never-ending dilemma with the present perfect tense and past simple tense. Quite often, my students, especially those who don't have a present perfect equivalent in their mother tongue, at first may find it hard to distinguish the tenses and their use. And of course, they stick to the solid rules the tenses represent. And that is great. The rules are created in grammar to be followed by the users of the language. However, the rules can still be flexible when the sentence doesn't change the context drastically. So what I'm driving at is the fact that it's okay to use the present perfect tense when you know when the action actually happened. You know the date, or the date is important for you. By using the present perfect tense, you simply just stress on the experience in general or on the results of some actions that happened in the past. And you may still be experiencing these results right now. Knowing the date when something happened doesn't forbid you from using the present perfect tense. Can it work the other way around, and can you use past simple in the context of present perfect? Of course, you may come across it, especially in American English, which uses past simple in the present perfect situations in British English. For example, an American person may ask you, "Did you finish yet?" Or "Did you already book the tickets?" instead of "Have you finished yet?" or "Have you already booked the tickets?" in the British variety of English. So as you can see, even if you mix the tenses in the context I just mentioned or in different ones, somebody can still understand you. The communication process is usually wider than just one sentence out of the context, and it is still better to say something anyway rather than block yourself and leave your interlocutor without a comment because you start overthinking whether you should go for present perfect or past simple. And be careful, because sometimes the tenses can change the meaning drastically. For example, if you say they were married for 20 years, you imply they are either dead right now or they are divorced right now. If you say they have been married for 20 years, they are still, happily or not, married. So as you can see, grammar can save lives and marriages. And not joking at all right now, if somebody's in doubt and wants to make sure if they understand you well in situations and contexts like that with the marriage, they will always ask you for clarification. Okay, and now I have an insect example for you to make you visualize it, so then you will maybe remember it better. So I can say, there's a lot of cockroaches in the sink, or should I have said, there are a lot of cockroaches? Of course, grammatically, I should have said, there are cockroaches, since there are more than just one cockroach. But which one sounds better? Which version you are more familiar with? I'd say you would go for there's a lot or there is a lot version, and this one may sound more familiar, though ungrammatical. But it is so commonly used, people actually don't consider the mistake and use it in an informal and everyday language. However, if you happen to write essays or you use the language in a more formal way, have it in mind. Want to sound natural? Don't hesitate to use the singular version there is with a plural noun. That's okay. And now the nightmare of some language purists, putting a preposition at the end of the sentence. And this rule is a great example to prove that the spoken language lives its own life and it adapts to the needs of its users. The language goes for easier and more convenient options. So let me give you some twin sentences with the same meaning, but with a different word order. So pair number one, the first one, I can say, who did you speak to? Or to whom did you speak? Pair number two, I can say, I don't know who I will go with. Or I don't know with whom I will go. Pair number three, I can say, who are you looking for? Or for whom are you looking? And pair number 4, I can either say, I need something to write on, or I need something on which to write. Which sentence sounds more natural in each pair? I guess number 1. And you may have never considered it a mistake, and it is not a mistake in my view. It is acceptable in a spoken and written language, in official and less official forms. It makes you sound more natural and less uptight, and you don't sound like a course book language when you use the sentence number 1 with a preposition at the end. This way of forming sentences is universal and has come into everyday correct usage. But still, for some language purists, this classic grammar rule of not putting the preposition at the end of the sentence should be followed and should remain unbreakable. Sometimes I guess they forget the language is here to serve its users. The next one is connected with social changes we have been going through, and it perfectly depicts how the language can shift and adapt to all the changes we have already gone through. And I would also say the language can adapt to social standards and to political correctness. The correctness which is required at the time we are using the language. Let me give you 3 examples. The first one, everyone has to know smoking doesn't do them good. Number 2, nobody should be responsible for the mess which is not theirs. And number 3, one should ask themselves a question what they want to do in life. As you may have noticed, I use pronouns they, them, their, themselves in sentences starting with a singular pronoun, everyone, nobody, and one. And it's not a mistake to mark the pronoun reserved for a plural subject with the words like everyone, everybody, anybody, no one, nobody, and so on, when we don't know the gender of the subject. It's now a common practice to use it this way. People used to use him or he in the past, but then it turned out not to be fair in terms of gender equality. So people tried to figure out he/she solution, or she divided with a slash. So then you would either read it as she or he, which didn't look good when written down. It's kind of problematic for languages which are not gender neutral, and I believe the best solution for languages like that is to introduce the they solution. Since nowadays people are very flexible with the pronouns, or they prefer to not use pronouns at all, and we do care to treat everyone with respect and equality, I do believe that's the best solution. It hurts nobody, serves everybody, and includes everyone as well. And now can you remember how you were taught the first or the second conditional? Were you taught you can never, absolutely never, use will or would in the if clause, so in the sentence with a condition? I hate the never word in the rules of grammar, and I hate it when narrow-minded teachers overuse it instead of saying there are some exceptions, and sometimes you can use it, but you don't have to worry about it right now. So now, to all of you who thought it is impossible, I can say, I will be over the moon if you will accompany me at the event. So by saying it, I'm super polite. Or I can say, if you will continue talking to me this way, I will leave. So I am extremely pissed off saying it. Or in the second conditional, I can say, if you would be so kind to help me with the project, I would be eternally grateful. So again, it's almost the Mount Everest of the English politeness. So as you can see, it is possible to use will or would in conditionals, but you have to be either extremely polite or extremely pissed off. And of course, in other cases, don't use will or would in conditionals in this if clause if you introduce a condition. But bear in mind, it is still possible to use these words just in a different context. And even if you use them in, let's say, emotionally neutral conditions, I can still understand you. And talking about wills and woulds, I'm going to comment a bit on the wish structure. If you talk about present or general regrets and wishes, you use past tenses, or you can use would if it drives you nuts or you have no influence on it. For instance, I wish you would stop talking rubbish. So I can't help it and I can at least express my regret about it. Or I wish it would stop pouring down with rain. I have no influence on the weather, but again, I can complain a bit. Why not? So if you introduce another subject in your wish sentence, in your regret or complaint, and it's not about you, and it either drives you nuts or you have no influence on it, be free to introduce would with this different subject. When it comes to past regrets, most of the grammar books and online resources will tell you can use either past perfect simple or past perfect continuous. And no matter if your regret is emotionally parked or neutral, or no matter if you had any influence on the past action, on the action that you express your regret about, or not. So the grammar rules will show you examples such as, I wish I hadn't met you, but I did. Or introducing another subject, I wish you hadn't been driving so fast, but you were. So there's no indicator of my emotions in these examples, as it is with would in the present and general regrets. But then you watch movies or series, and you may come across sentences like that, especially in the American movies. I wish you could have done it better. Or I wish we would have had more time together. Or she wishes they would have gotten another chance. You see, there's could and would in the modal in the past form. So would have gotten, or would have had, or could have done. And it is used on everyday basis, and it is acceptable, and it is not considered a mistake. And the last one, a very solid rule. Don't you ever split infinitives to simplify it. Don't you ever split the verb with to. For example, to do, or to want, or to go. Don't split them in the sentence. But then a spoken language comes and says, watch me. So let's have a look at a very innocent sentence. I'd prefer to do it. And now let's negate it. I'd prefer not to do it. Never split to and do. They're in love, or at least officially on paper and in grammar books. You don't split them, their bond seems to be strong. But the spoken language has the power to split them, and you can come across sentences like, I'd prefer to not do it, or I want you to not touch it, which are considered incorrect. However, they are acceptable in an everyday usage. And that will be it. Thank you for staying with me. Hope you found something useful in this episode. Maybe you caught yourself wondering if the stuff you're saying is actually correct, but you haven't had a chance to find the answer yourself. And this podcast did it for you. So remember, a language serves its users, and it is created the way you can communicate despite the mistakes. Nothing is ever black or white in life, and in the language too. Because as you can see, some of the language aspects considered incorrect are actually not in various situations. So stay open-minded and flexible as the language is. And before I go, for those who listen to my podcast regularly, I'm gonna stop recording the English podcast for a while. Not sure for how long, but I need to take a break for various reasons. So thank you for being with me so far, and I promise I'll be back at some point in 2024, definitely with a podcast and with other projects. Have a wonderful new year full of excitement and happiness and the enthusiasm and motivation to learn languages. Stay well, and may all your bigger and smaller aims and dreams come true. It was Kasia speaking to you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.